Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Walker. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, picking up, the aftermath of the last episode. Obviously, Twilight texting, quote unquote, Duke Walker, because of August. Like, I get it. His heart was in the right place because he thought, like, oh, man, this is someone that my dad... It's like, why would you do that? Because I guess for him, it's like he needed answers, and he figured his dad wasn't really going to give him the answers he wanted. So, but obviously, we got a little bit of a flashback of, like, how the whole him and Twilight thing happened. Obviously, we know that was part of the... It turns out this is, in particular, connected to the case. He was gone for, like, that 10 months. And so, when it was all said and done... Like, present day, like, he's got to get back into it. And the guy, obviously, like, he doesn't have time to really explain it to anybody because he's trying to get to Twilight, try to get her to leave town as soon as possible because he doesn't want to jeopardize his family and everything. Obviously, he's telling August and Stella, like, oh, it's like a manhunt thing, blah, 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 blah. But obviously, August is still holding on to everything that went down last episode. And, it's still like a lot of unresolved feelings in that regard. So, but Walker, meets up with Twyla. Granted, Graves, an FBI agent, shows up because it's like the whole Twyla thing because they've been keeping tabs on her phone and she got in contact with. It's like, oh, Duke contacted her. So the moment August sent that text, it set all this kind of emotion in a certain regard. So Walker's just trying to meet up with her, like, hey, get her out of town as soon as possible. But obviously Graves thinks that Walker's dirty because there was $300K that was never recovered from when the crew got taken down. And so also he didn't get on stand, but that's because Liam didn't want to put his brother on stand, also burning his identity because it also would have put his kids in danger as well. So Liam didn't want to do that. But now it's a situation of like, because even, Mickey is kind of like, it's like Walker's most likely trying to get her to leave town. Like, she kind of giving Walker the benefit of the doubt. But even James is kind of questioning, I don't know. Like, obviously this was a complicated time for Walker because Graves was throwing out the fact that it took him like 10 months to like complete this whole thing. Granted, he didn't start getting in with the crew until, 6 months in, because it was like 4 months ago is when he kind of got tight with Twilight as well as the rest of them. So, because obviously, like, it turns out, like, Clint, he's in prison. Jackson's, I don't know if they really talked about Jack. Well, I guess he must have gotten out or something like that, or whatever the case may be. I guess he must have got a lighter sentence. And it turns out, like, a Crystal is dead. But other than that, like, I think they're looking at it as like, oh, Twyla's fine and dandy, plus there's a missing $300K, which turns out that's why she got in contact with Duke, because she's like, oh, you must have the $3K, which he was like, $300K, and she's like, I don't have it. I was under the assumption she had it, so it's like, oh, neither of them have it. I'm like, what's up with that then? But before things can really, they're dancing and stuff like that, because obviously he has to pretend to go back to being this person. He even had to put on an aftershave and just kind of like, I guess for him it just takes, he just kind of has to like, he fills a sink up with water, dunks his head, and I think it's just kind of like it's almost, I think it's like a metaphorical cleansing of himself, just to kind of just be like, gotta shake it off and just kind of shake off his nerves to a certain extent. But when it was all, obviously, it seemed like, oh, he's just trying to get her out of town, but it seems like maybe he's caught up in it a little bit, but it turns out not to be the case. Because, luckily Mickey was there to have his back because, hey, Jackson showed up because it was kind of an ambush. They're both looking for the $300,000, and it's like, he doesn't have it. It's like, I know you don't believe me, but hey, we need to make this, you want your $300K, we're just going to have to go through the Kyle plan. And it's like, oh, the plan that Clint came up with before he ended up getting busted, that they didn't have a chance to go through. So it's like, all right. But then, like, Twilight's testing Mickey. Mickey uses the name Adriana, and it's like, oh yeah, but also, oh, you mean Hoyt? It's like, lucky for her, she met Hoyt recently, so that actually helped out a lot in this case. It's like, oh boy, everyone on the other side of things is kind of excited about it. This case also presented an interesting thing about, Liam's perspective on things. Like, the Duke situation actually kind of brings up not tough memories just for Walker, but also him as well, because Walker wanted to say, like, hey, let's jump on this situation as soon as possible. Like, we need to, like, arrest him now because James and Graves, they want to do a job. We need to jump on this. Some people might get hurt. But Liam was like, no, let's wait. They will go down for heavier charges if we let them if they step foot in the bank and then they get way more charges. So wait till then. But because they did wait, people got hurt. So I think that's one reason why, well, not just hurt, people died. And I think that weighs heavy on both Liam and Walker. Because for Walker, I think that's what being Duke, he just didn't like who he was at that time. Because that was also a reminder of him kind of trying to run away. He jumped headfirst into a big operation like that just so he can kind of, I think, escape the Emily stuff. I was wondering if the case involved him also investigating Emily, but it's like, no, he just dived into a case so he wouldn't have to, I think about the Emily thing. He was just kind of running away, as he says later on, kind of pretending in many different regards. And, Stella and August kind of confirm about, they were pretending as well in certain regards. But yeah, I think, but for Liam, it's just kind of like, I should have listened to Walker. I made a mistake. And it's like, so that's why he knows, like, this case doesn't just hold ghost for Walker. It also holds ghost for him as well. But before they're able to even kind of, well, also, like, Mickey had to prove herself. But I did like that. It's just like as they're walking and it's for him talking, because it's like, for one, he forgot Stella's game. He got caught up in all of this. Once again, all of this is kind of on August, but also at the same time, it's on Walker. If he had explained things from the beginning, but I guess for him, it would have just been too hard to explain because it would have just taken it down a part of his life he doesn't want to think about. Like it's boxed away. I don't want to even think about it. But it's like, you kept it. To be fair, it's like, I guess he figured like if he'd ever need Duke again, he would want to pull it out, but it's always there. Like, I think it speaks volumes that he kept it instead of destroying. But I guess like when you have a good alias, I guess the typical cop thing to do is to keep it alive just in case something later on comes up to say like, hey, this is going to be necessary. I guess that's kind of like the potential way around that, like why he kept the box. But regardless, like I said, it's just like if Walker had probably explained things properly, wouldn't create the complicated circumstances because August is talking to Ruby, and it's like, obviously for him, he interprets it as my dad's box, this Duke stuff. He didn't know about the Duke thing, but it's like, he thinks like, oh, my dad's going to leave again. He left for almost a year last time, so he's thinking like, oh, like my dad has an excuse to run away again. Which is so interesting because he had that whole argument when he was a little drunk, but he was kind of getting mad at Stella being like, oh, do you want him to leave again? And she's like, what? What do you talk? Like, obviously him kind of said, once again, that's one of the few times you got to see August actually be a little honest, because he's always just kind of like carried and bottled up a lot of stuff. And I think, good and bad with it, he did kind of, was a little more open about his feelings. Granted, he picked the worst time to confront them because, like, he rose up because, like, oh, who's this? I was like, oh, please don't tell me it's August. It's like, I was like, no, it can't be August. And it turned out to be Ruby and August, because Ruby, I think the way she was talking about it, it was like, you need to try, like, if you don't tell your dad, like, how you really feel about this whole thing and see what's really going on, then how can you really say you've tried if you're not willing to try, And August confronts him, and he's like, you need to get out of here. You don't understand what's going on. But he's kind of compromising and operating. I was hoping that like Liam or James would pop out of nowhere and be like, all right, kid, you don't know what's going on. Your dad's actually super undercover. It doesn't make the best first impression, because I think this is the first time like Ruby's really seen him too. So it's like, it's kind of like sucky, because it's like, it's like, wow, your dad's such an asshole. Like, Walker does come off asshole-ish, but he's just trying to get he's doing what, but then, he's trying, Walker, I think called him Liam, August, saying all that stuff to Walker was kind of like, heartbreaking and stuff like that. It's like, if you leave, like, I don't ever want to see you again. And it's like, that's the most heartbreaking thing to hear. And, he has to pretend like everything's okay. But, I thought it was a sweet moment where it's just like, Mickey grabs his hand and it's like, don't worry, it's going to be okay. August is going to forgive you. And Walker's like, I don't know. But thinking back to that day, because obviously looking at all these guns and stuff, and it's like, he knows they're going to go in guns blazing. And it's like, I don't want this to turn out like that last job. But then he thought about what Crystal's final words were. And then he says it out loud. Oh my God. Like, remember our last dance. And then he's like, Crystal knew she was dying, so she was trying to let me know where the money was hidden. It's like the jukebox that they went to all the time. Like, obviously we're there earlier in the episode. It's like, because that was their spot, all four of them. And it's like, well, all 5 of them. But it's like, right, it figured it out. Like, Walker's like, that's where it was, at jukebox, their favorite song and stuff like that. And then Tawny proceeds to knock Jackson out, and it's like, yep, she's going to take all of this. And it's like, oh, well, no honor amongst thieves type of situation. I even love Mickey getting mad at him. It's like, you just had to talk. This is a moment you didn't have to talk, and you talked. He's like, well, at least now we know where the money is. Plus, it's like, what? But he's like, honestly, you didn't think she'd steal from me? It's like, yeah, she's a thief. It's like, he's like, yeah, I didn't think about it. I just love that little partnership moment of just kind of like the womp womp of it all. It is kind of crazy that you ended up kind of getting, I mean, I guess it's because in his mind, he didn't think Tawny was capable of it. It's like, but she's a thief. Like, what made you think she wouldn't? So, but, obviously taking what, August said, he was like, wait, he knows how to, August said he never wants to see Duke again. And I was like, all right, I get it. Like, I immediately was like, okay, what you're going to do is fake your death type of situation. I figured that's where they were going to go with that. But him confronting Tawny. And for her saying an interesting thing where it's like, she could see, she always wanted it to be her and him. But then she said, like, there's a look in his eye that it's like, that you will never let me in. Because, and like, he had said later on, like, it wasn't a real thing. He was pretending, because I think it probably felt good to, once again, not have to be Walker. Just like Mickey had talked about, the fact is that right now at that moment, because obviously what was going on between her and Trey, she didn't want to be Mickey at that time. So being someone else, it felt good. And I think the same thing applied to Walker. I mean, that's always a complicated thing with being undercover. It kind of seduces you a little bit. But it seemed like even Walker, like, as things went on, he didn't really like being Duke because of just like all the stuff he was kind of quote unquote kind of complicit with. Even though he was undercover, it's like he couldn't do anything to stop like anyone from dying. Because even him, I think even he didn't want Crystal to die. So he was like, no, let's wave the white flag. You can get some medical help. But, so it's sad things kind of played. Like, I think even on that side of things, it's like, yeah, she's a bad guy. But I think he still didn't want her to die because he got kind of close to her. Once again, downside to being undercover. But because he was a little honest with her, where it's like he had lost someone, so he had to, like, he was saying like, oh, I lost my brother, it's like my best friend, so he just needed to get away from home, so because she's like, I've never seen you more happy than when you're riding a bull. Because I think it's just one of those things of just like, hey, he felt that for a little bit of time, he's able to just kind of forget everything and just be in that moment rather than just kind of think about everything, that had went down. So, which is even sadder when you actually think about it, because obviously it's like, it makes it, it makes the fact is that was all kind of fake, which, I mean, he could say that was pretending, he was pretending, but was it all really fake? But even the way she said, like, I could never, you would never ever fully let me in, looking through his eyes, you feel like there's always going to be something there holding him out. Understandably so. It's like Emily, like, he loved her, he's back with his family, and I think it's just a reminder of, like, that she's gone, and it's like he'll never get close to anyone else like that again. He can't bring himself to do that, I think. I don't know. I just thought that was such a fascinating development. But obviously, like, setting up the whole thing. I even love that. I was thinking it was going to be like Mickey who shoots him or something like that, because I thought Mickey was going to show up and be like, damn you, Duke or something, and shoot him. But it was like, no, setting it up so that Graves shot him. I guess you needed specifically the police to be shown to be the one to shoot him, and him be like, go big or go home, right, Tawny? Twilight. I want to say Tawny just because, like, when I see the name, it makes me think of Tawny from Rectify. Regardless, but him falling in a pool and everything, all dramatic, like, it's like, take her out of here. But it's like, hey, Duke is dead, so he never has to worry about this again. And, explaining that later on to Stella and August, because like August was like, if you're going to leave, you should tell her. And it's like, tell me what, Dad? And he's like, nothing. It's like, yeah, Duke, he's like, yeah, your brother kind of followed me, which I would be super impressed if it wasn't so dangerous and what he did kind of get mixed up in operation, which August almost like, wait, so you're not leaving? He's like, no, like, Duke is gone and I'm never going to, nothing inside or outside of this box is ever going to take me away from you two ever again, So, once again, I think he's probably going to have to rectify that with Ruby. He's like, yeah, so my dad was kind of undercover at the time, and we kind of potentially could have blown a big operation. So that's kind of a cool story in its own right. But yeah. Which, speaking of Stella, like, obviously Trey, new position and everything at work. ended up being like, hey, he's coaching the team she's on. I wonder, does he know that, because I don't know if he saw her name. Like, he might have just been like, oh, because I don't know, he never necessarily called her by name. So I don't know, it's the first day, so he probably hasn't really gotten to know everybody by name. I don't know if he really paid attention to the list or whatever, like if he had any time to really, because it's hard to say whether he recognizes that's Walker's daughter or not. I don't think he did, because it was like, because it probably would have complicated things if he did bring up Walker, even if he does understand that that's his daughter. But it was kind of interesting kind of hearing, her perspective on things, because, he's trying to open up to her, but obviously she's not big into opening up. But she finally opened up to Trey and talked about the fact is the reason why she plays soccer is because, it's like my mom was kind of very good at soccer. I think it's like she kind of played like, what was it, like these professional games, or at least when she was in college, she played soccer, and my dad said he never missed a game. And so on some level, like, she went into, because remember, she wasn't always doing soccer. It was a more recent change in her life in this past year. And it's like, because she says, like, on some level, she was kind of hoping that maybe on some level, like, if I'm playing soccer, maybe my dad will show up. It was just kind of like a wishful thinking type of thing. But then Trey is like, I get it. Your dad was away for a long time. You've been through a lot. That's a lot for anyone to handle. But you have to think about, at the end of the day, who are you playing for, yourself or your dad? But at the end, she pulls out her mom's jersey, like, and was saying like, hey, I want to switch my number to mom's, So it's like, I think that way she's carrying her mom with her anytime she plays, which I think is sweet. But like I said, I don't think Trey correlated that that's hit Walker's order. Like I said, maybe he did, and he just thought it would be better not to mention it, because it's like, oh, I know your dad, but maybe that's going to be something we see going forward, where it's like, he's at the game, he's like, oh, Trey. It's like, hey. And then she'd be like, wait, you know each other? It's like, yeah, this is Mickey, my partner's boyfriend, Trey. Hey, small world. But what was also interesting too, like, because obviously there's a complicated thing with Trey and Mickey. They kind of had a little bit of a spat earlier in the episode, because he wants her to meet up with his mom. Like, he's like, yeah, the conversation of moms, it's kind of a complicated conversation, he knows, for her. But it's like, I want you to meet my mom. My mom wants to know the particulars of it. But for her, it's like, you kind of ambushed me with this, like bringing up moms in a conversation in general, not the biggest, not the brightest spot for Mickey. But then later on, she apologized at that time, but apologizes even more, because she is like, and refers to her mom, she's like, Adriana has a tendency to make you feel kind of small. And you're like, that's where the name came from. You use your own mom's name for your alias. That's why it seemed like, I was wondering if she had really come up with it that fast. It's like, no, because they weren't planning on sending her undercover. So it's like, she came up with that name in particular on the, I mean, and even Walker was saying it at the beginning. When you lie, keep the lie believable enough, and that keep a name that will come second nature to you, and not something you have to think about all the time. Like, so a name like, on the spot, it's like, yeah, just take your mom's name and kind of apply. I thought that was kind of interesting. I've seen that in something else recently. I won't go into it, but it was just interesting when I was watching something and someone had to use their mom's name as an alias. I thought that was interesting. But Trey talks about the fact is, like, Tina, like, referencing his mom being like, she's not as like judgmental, and that, like, kind of be like, don't worry, my mom's a little more open. You don't have to worry about that type of stuff. So I'm interested to meet, because the way she was talking about it too, like, I don't know if she had referenced it before now, but it sounds like her mom's a doctor. So it's like, oh, that probably comes with even more of a thing of like, oh, like, probably like, if you're going to do anything, follow in my footstep down the medical field. Like, I don't know, like, but I'm interested, because that's eventually going to turn into a storyline of meeting her mom, and under what circumstances, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe it'll be something Trey related, or maybe it'll be something Case and or Walker related, which will definitely be interesting. So things are kind of obviously moving on that front, and it's like, oh, like, your mom wants to know the particulars. So he's like, oh, so there's a maybe, and she's like, yeah, there might be a chance, maybe, deciding of making this kind of, something they're both in for the long haul. So I thought that was kind of a nice moment between them. Obviously, them, like I brought up earlier, them talking a little bit as they're burning all the stuff about Duke. It's like, so tell me about Duke. It's like, well, he did a lot of pretending, this and that. And it's like, oh, being in love. And he was like, yeah, that too. And once again, like I brought up earlier, they were like, yeah, we did a lot of pretending. They had to kind of pretend like they were okay when they weren't, they try to pretend like everything was normal, even though it was like their dad wasn't around, their mom was gone. Once again, that's like I brought up, like even her pretending like, oh, she was really into soccer, but it was like her reasoning for really getting into soccer necessarily. Obviously, but each one of them's carrying over a torch of their moms in some shape or form. Her with soccer, with August is photography. So I thought that was kind of a nice moment, and I think this whole situation in the end ended up bringing them closer together. So I thought that was pretty neat. Other than that, there is the thing between James and Liam, and it's like we both requested Emily's drone footage, and both. So it's like I don't know whether it's something James has been looking into the entire time, or is it just Walker coming back made him go like, well, let me take another look at this. Like, I'm wondering what it sparked that. And the same thing for Liam, like what necessarily sparked them both to look into it. So they both found out that there is more to Emily's death, because they both telling Walker there wasn't, and things came up to kind of say there wasn't, but now it seems like there is. And I think they're both probably reluctant to tell him, because they already saw what looking into this Emily thing, like the Emily situation made him spiral to begin with, and now that he's kind of back home, kind of trying to take steps forward, they're probably worried that he might backpedal a little bit because of this. We'll ultimately have to wait and see what they ended up, discovering. Like I said, and fully explain like what sparked them wanting to look into this stuff. Was it simply Walker coming back? Because I'm wondering, did James kind of make Walker walk away from it, even though he had been looking into it already? But the way Liam was talking about it made it seem like it was almost like after he'd already told Walker to walk away from it, he started looking into it. Maybe something had crossed his desk that maybe he was only purviewed to because he's captain or whatever. But that's definitely going to be interesting to see where things kind of go on that front. But I'm interested to see where everything takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.